Hi everyone, welcome back to the Deep Psychology Podcast. I am your host Ross Edwards, and today we're going to be talking about my spiral dynamics test. Welcome to the Deep Psychology Podcast. I'm your host Ross Edwards, author, coach and podcaster. We cover deep insights into your psychology, helping you grow in psyche and spirit. Make sure to subscribe to Deep Psychology on Spotify or Apple to stay up to date. You can also visit the website deep-psychology.com, visited by tens of thousands of people every month for lots of free resources. If you want to go deeper with this work, you might like to do coaching with me. Head to the website for more details. It's time for today's episode. So, my spiral dynamics test. We're going to look at how to know what levels of development you are at in the spiral dynamics model. And there's going to be a big twist in all of this episode and this topic. So I'm not just going to give you like an easy checklist or an easy, answer these questions and I'll tell you what stage you're at. I want to actually kind of flip this question on its head, okay? So I'm not just going to be sitting telling you how to decide what stage you're at. I'm going to look at this question very carefully and maybe analyze the question a bit before we get to some kind of test, okay? And I think this will help you really understand human development and the spiral dynamics model in a way you perhaps didn't before. So I just want to say before we get going that I'm not going to be teaching you spiral dynamics today. If you want to learn spiral dynamics, I've got ebooks on it. I've also got free articles on my website on it. And I've also got podcast episodes on most of the stages and the model as a whole. So go and search for them if you're not sure about what spiral dynamics is beforehand, because if you don't, this will probably go over your head. So I just want to say that this is not an episode teaching you about spiral dynamics, the basic theory, okay? You should already know this by now. However, I will do a quick overview. So the stages in spiral dynamics are beige, purple, red, blue, orange, green, yellow, and turquoise. I'll just go through the themes of each of these stages. So beige is focused on survival instincts. Purple is focused on magical thinking and tribal belonging. Red is focused on power and individuality. Blue is focused on order and rules. Orange is focused on achievement and rationality. Green is focused on equality, community and empathy. Yellow is focused on integration and pragmatism. Turquoise is focused on unity and compassion. So these are very, very short summaries, okay? But it will just to kind of set the backdrop here. So listen, let's get into the meat of this topic. So when we talk about a spiral dynamics test, what people will usually ask is, well, listen, if these are the stages, beige to turquoise, what stage am I at? Because what spiral dynamics does is it helps you understand human psychological and cultural evolution as it unfolds through different value systems or stages. Okay, so when you learn a model like this, and most people who come to spiral dynamics, a lot of the time it's their first model, the first model of human development. And often it's in a personal growth context. They usually ask, well, listen, there's beige to turquoise, what stage am I at? And this is a great question to ask. You might not realize how complicated a question it is right now, but I'm going to make that very clear to you. It's great because it's, you're asking the right question. You're asking, I know there's this tool called spiral dynamics for my self-awareness and my growth. I can use it in several areas in my life. I can use it to understand other people. I can use it to understand human history. I can use it to change my view of myself and my world. and how I approach life. So that's brilliant. The problem is that this question right here can easily be misused for different purposes. Let's get into some of the cautions I have against misusing the question of what stage am I at. For one thing, it oversimplifies you and it oversimplifies human beings. So one thing I'd like you to take away is that basically humans never just occupy one stage. And in fact, one of the rules of thumb that the original spiral dynamics theorists put forward in their original work is that roughly, this is a rule of thumb, but let's say we have a dominant stage and then we have secondary stages. What basically happens is that we have a dominant stage which occupies about 50% of our value making, our behavior, our psychology. The remaining 50% is composed of 25% of the stages left and right of our dominant stage. So let's say you're predominantly orange. That means that about 50% of your behavior and psychology and values and all the rest of it is derived from orange and or can be understood as orange. And then the 25% is blue and 25% is green, right? So that is just, it's a very sort of rough rule of thumb, okay? But what it does is it reminds you that you're more complicated than you think you are. You might think you're green, but actually there's half of your psyche is operating from orange and yellow combined, according to this rule. So it just asks you to step back a little bit from the question and say, maybe it's a bit more complicated than this. I can see maybe actually, okay, there a lot of my psyche is driven by a certain stage of spiral dynamics, but if I look more carefully, I can see, okay, there's other ingredients in there. Knowing this helps you bring a more nuanced view of yourself, and it helps you understand yourself more deeply, okay? The other trap is that, quite simply, when you ask this question, you're self-biased, right? We're all self-biased, and especially if we're into personal growth, there's a particular trap we can fall into, which is basically to look for evidence that supports us being at the stage we want to be at, which is usually yellow for people that study spiral dynamics. I don't know if that's because the original theorists sort of put yellow on a pedestal. I think they do to some extent. That might be it. There might be an implicit sort of bias towards it, which translates to the reader. I'm not sure. But yeah, that's what tends to happen. And so, you're asking the question, but you're doing it with a bias. And you're doing it in a way that could be a kind of confirmation bias that leads you to feel superior to other people. I'm at yellow, you're at green, you're at orange, you're at blue. What you'll notice is that you're very reluctant to put people at stages higher than you are. Now that might be because you're actually higher than them overall in your development, but it might be because you're BSing, basically. So that's another problem with it, that you can really, really, really fool yourself. Even if you think you're doing some sort of objective test, it's amazing how much you can you can sort of trick yourself into putting certain answers that will give you the result you're looking for and so on. So that's another problem. Another problem, or something to take into account if you're asking this question, is that basically the more levels we have, the higher the stage we are at predominantly. So let's say our predominant stage is yellow. The more levels we have online. For example, a predominant yellow person has gone through beige and purple and red and blue and orange and green to get to yellow. So all of these stages remain active inside them. They don't just drop away. They might sort of fade and they might not be so obvious, but they remain inside you. And basically, so the later the stage, the more stages we have gone through to get to where we are, and the bigger a repertoire we have, and the more difficult it is to say this person is at this stage or that stage, simply because they have a much more complicated character and personality, right? And there's this amazing quote from Suzanne Cook-Reuter that really describes this very well and concisely. She says, quote, "The later the stage, the more variability for unique self-expression exists, and the less readily we can determine where a person's centre of gravity lies," end quote. So think of it like a repertoire. If you've learned 3 songs on a guitar, then it's pretty predictable what you're going to play. You're only going to play 1 of 3 songs. Whereas if you've learned 20 songs on a guitar, it's quite unpredictable. You could be playing for an hour one day, and you could be playing for an hour the next day, and you might not play any of the same songs twice. So that's kind of what's happening with these stages. The bigger the repertoire you have, because you've sort of developed a more complicated personality that can handle more situations and that sees things in a more complicated way. So when you ask the question, what stage am I at? It's kind of like asking how many stages am I at? For example, as I said, if you're at yellow, you're not just at yellow, you're really at yellow plus all the previous ones. If you're at orange, you're really at orange plus all the previous ones. They might not be in your face. There might be shadow. There might be a lack of integration, but broadly speaking, you're really asking how many stages am I at? The other thing to take into account is that circumstances can push you into lower stages. And really, development is dictated, a lot of it is dictated by circumstances. Now, we don't want to go over the top. We want to sort of balance the two, circumstances and individuality and individual factors, but we have to take circumstances into account. There's a reason why if you go to the Middle East, you're going to find lower levels of development, because the whole sort of social structure and the culture there is not at a point where people are going to really, consistently head into orange and green and beyond. If you're born in America, you're going to have there's a certain probability that you will be blue or orange or green. There's a sort of profile that you're being born into. If you're born in Scandinavia, you're likely to get into green and teal or yellow quicker than in other areas of the world. And really, you're way more likely to even get there at all in your development. So that's another trap, asking what stage am I at? It's all about you. It's like you're asking too much about yourself, and you're maybe not looking at the circumstances that have led to it. You might say, "Oh, I'm teal, I'm yellow," and that you might use that as a kind of way to pat yourself on the back. But you have to realize that without your circumstances, and of course there may be individual factors involved, you've maybe done a lot of work to go through these stages, but without your circumstances, it would be really difficult to be yellow. And so just take that into account. There's always a context behind people's development. We don't have to deny individual factors again, but we don't deny the factors that are beyond their control and that are more collective in nature. So let's taking into account all these limitations, I think we should propose a better approach to this question. And the question that I'm going to propose to you is not what level am I at, but instead, how healthily do I embody each level? So it's not just transcending. It's not just, oh, I'm done with orange, I'm going beyond orange. I'm done with green, I'm going beyond green. It's integrating. How do I embody orange? How do I embody green? How do I embody blue and red and all the rest of it? It's not about being at one stage. It's about how do you operate from many stages at once? And can you honestly, truly integrate them all? To do so is a very complex question. I've written a book about this called Spiral Dynamics Embodied, which just scratches the surface, but it gets you started on how to actually measure your embodiment of these levels in two key areas of your life, relationships and career. So, that's the question. It's how do I integrate all the levels, not, what stage am I at? Listen, again, with nuance, that can be a good question to ask, but it just depends on circumstances, and it just depends on your motives as well. And when you're at yellow, this becomes an intrinsic drive. As I said in the very short introduction to these stages that I did at the start of the episode, yellow is about integration, right? Fundamentally. So, this is a question we want to ask. We want to ask, how do I healthily integrate all these levels, the ones I've been through, and how do I make room for those that are yet to come? I want to give you another Cook-Greuter quote here, just before I wrap up the episode. She says, quote, "Later stages are reached only by journeying through the earlier stages. Once a stage has been traversed, it remains a part of the individual's response repertoire, even when more complex later stages are adopted as primary lenses to look at experience." End quote. So the conclusion. Spiral dynamics is a multi-dimensional map. It's not a hierarchy of superiority. You're not better for being at one stage or the other. Your circumstances play a huge role. It's very deceptive to ask the question, what stage am I at, for the reasons discussed. Every stage has its value and must be recognised, embodied and integrated. So that's the question we want to ask, is how can I healthily embody each of these stages? And basically that true maturity, as Cook-Greuter alludes to, consists of embracing all stages as aspects of a unified human identity. So listen, if that sounds good and you want to go deeper with this, I do coaching, and one of the key tools I use in coaching is spiral dynamics and developmental theory. So if you feel like this is relevant for you right now and you want to address some area of your life, or you want to better understand this theory and better apply it to your life, head to deep-psychology.com for a free 30-minute consultation with me, and we'll see if we're a good fit, and we'll see if I can help you out with that. All right, I think that's all I have to say about the spiral dynamics test that I didn't offer you. I kind of offered a totally different perspective on it, but ultimately I think a more productive perspective. Thanks a lot for listening to Deep Psychology, and I will see you on Sunday for the next installment in my Integral Spirituality series. Take care. Thanks for listening. If you liked this episode, please leave a review and make sure to subscribe on Apple or Spotify. If you'd like to go deeper with this work, head to deep-psychology.com to do coaching with me. Thanks a lot, and I'll see you soon.